Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Auspicious occasion. I heard we've got a few apologies. I heard the traffic is absolutely terrible. I don't know if it's load shedding or, well, I know certain parts had load shedding. But yeah, so there might be a few people joining us, so please I'll carry on. I'm doing the quick welcome for everybody to this great occasion. A few admin things I'd just like to get out the way before we start. For those of you that have Wi-Fi, it should be on the table, but little cards, if there's a little card, it's incorrect, but I see they have put new bigger cards on, but I'll just read it out for you as well. So the username is capital W and then a space, and then capital G for guest. So it's www space guest. And then the password is Webb of Wenzel, all together, no spaces, all small letters. Also for the media, it's the hashtag is hashtag independent tax ombud, and the Twitter handle is @taxombud. Just some health and safety regulations that I have to read out before we start. Your health and safety is our priority, and request that you adhere to the following health and safety rules. Please ensure that you're always accompanied by a Webb Wenzel person at all times. Apparently there is free reign in the building, so please make sure you are with somebody. We don't want you getting lost. Please report all injuries and health and safety concerns to me immediately. There's also Angel from Webb Wenzel that will report any incidences. And her extension is 4804. Can somebody write that down if I'm not here? But the extension is 4804 should we need her. And do not venture into the building without a Webb Wenzel person, as I mentioned before. Now, when you hear the alarm, follow the exit signs to the nearest fire escape door. And if you look at the above on the roof, there's two of them over there, the little green things on the roof. We need to follow it. So it is actually behind the podium, so we might be scrambling to move things before we get out. And there are stairs as well located on each floor, and please look out for the green signage, as I said, on the ceiling, which will direct you to the first emergency exit. Do not leave the assembly point until the building has been declared safe, and the assembly point is as we go outside the reception where you came in. It's on the outside over there where we all need to please meet. Okay, so that's the admin out the way. I'm going to now hand over to Khadija Patel from Mail and Guardian. She's the editor-in-chief, to do the official welcoming of this function, and then the program will follow, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that after she's done.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us for the late start, and thank you all for coming. I think that as a journalist, as somebody who is grappling with the current moment that we are navigating in South Africa very intimately, these discussions are crucial. Trust in public institutions are declining every day, and that's as true for South Africa as it is for much of the rest of the world. And it is essential that we convene these discussions, first of all, to ensure that we are able to understand what is amiss and certainly build some consensus towards fixing things. In South Africa, a common complaint we receive as journalists is that, I just don't read the newspapers anymore because it's too negative. It's all bad news. I just would rather not. Life is hard enough as it is. I don't need to be reminded about how much everything sucks anyway. And yet, that's a very curious approach when we think about the great role media has played in our history in South Africa. So the Mail and Guardian, which is really an asset of South Africa's democracy, began life in 1985 as the Weekly Mail. And at that point, the apartheid state had shut down a number of English language, so-called liberal daily newspapers for their perceived intolerance and opposition to what was going on at that time. So a group of journalists banded together and they began what was then called in 1985 the Weekly Mail. The Weekly Mail was the most important source of information about the state of emergency period in the 1980s in South Africa and became so crucial to understanding what was happening in South Africa that when Madiba was released from prison in February 1990, the first media interview he gave was with the Weekly Mail. So in a very short time, this publication built up a formidable reputation. Fast forward a few years, we became the Mail and Guardian, and the Mail and Guardian has been at the center of huge investigations that have helped us understand the rifts, fissures, and abuses of power in South Africa. But like many public institutions in South Africa right now, like many civic institutions in South Africa right now, we are under siege. We need, as citizens, to bandy together to ensure that our institutions are protected and that we build a consensus towards civic engagement as well as improvement. So I hope that you have a fulfilling day here today. I hope that you leave feeling like you actually have accomplished something. I hope that the discussions are, that they're fruitful. I am certainly looking forward to being here for some part of it, but I would also, on behalf of the Mail and Guardian and the Office of the Tax Ombudsman, welcome you all here today, and thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Khadija. Yes, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Sharon Smolders. I'm Project Director at SAICA, and I deal with the advocacy role, where we deal with SARS and Parliament. And I have the privilege of being the facilitator for the panel discussion today. And I can tell you we are in for some really good discussions. There's some interesting issues that I think none of us have thought about, and it will be really good if all of you stay. So the background to how today is going to work, just to give you a bit of background, we're going to have the judge come speak just now to give us the keynote address. After that, we will be having a panel discussion with our 4 panelists. Who will be discussing and debating the issues at hand, which is the structural independence of the Office of the Tax Ombud. After that, we are going to break up into 2 separate groups, and we are going to, so the one group will stay in this particular room, the other one will move to the other rooms, and I'll give you details about that just now. And we're going to sit and discuss these issues in a little bit more detail. So why are we doing this? Well, the whole outcome of this is that we need some guidance on where to go from here. So the output from this meeting is to get some sort of thoughts on what needs to be done to ensure that the office gets independence, and does it need independence? I think we need to start with that, and if it does, what has to be done to ensure that it does become independent? And your input would really be welcome. So please don't leave after the panel discussion. Your inputs will be taken after that, and we will be breaking into smaller groups so that you can actually share your thoughts a bit better. So let me move on to the next thing, which is to welcome our keynote address. who is the judge himself, Judge Bernard Mwepe. And he's the former judge president of the North and South Gauteng High Courts, where he heard a number of cases, including business and tax matters, and was responsible for assigning judges to the tax courts. He also acted as judge of the Constitutional Court and also a judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal. He was a judge of the African Union's Court on Human and People's Rights, Tanzania, from 2006 to 2014, and was the vice president of the court when he left. Judge Mwepe has received many honors and awards, which include 3 honorary Doctor of Law degrees and an honorary doctorate in education, being made honorary captain of the South African Navy, which is very interesting, and honorary professor of law. He has received many leadership and human rights awards, including the Duma Nokwe Award. Now, before I ask him to come up, we have a little video that we'd like to play that will set the scene and provide context before he goes into the crux of the matter while we are all here.
One becomes more and more convinced that it was the right thing to do to establish this office. This statement is based on what we've experienced as an office, particularly if we go back to remind ourselves how humbly this office started, how small it started, with a staff of about 3, and now lately a staff more than 40. And over that period, we managed to handle a variety of complaints, the number of which keeps on increasing year in, year out. So we were working with the idea of establishing this important office. I think they've been vindicated. But I've just said that we looked back over the past years, and as we do so, there are some milestones that we pick up in the process. We know that at some point we were too interlinked and dependent on SARS. With the passage of time, we managed to create some space between this office and SARS. For example, we're able to employ our own staff without the involvement of SARS, and the minister was able to determine a budget himself, not SARS, for this office. And all these things serve a very important purpose, that is to emphasize the independence of this office. We hope that with passage of time, the office will become stronger and stronger. And indeed, my term having been renewed recently is one of my main objectives, to make sure that by the time I finish at the end of September 2022, this office shall have been established as an institution on its own, with its own life, with its own personality, and with its own status, as a structurally independent institution. If we reach that point, we shall all be able to say that we have established an office of which we can be proud, an office that will outlive all of us, and an office which the people of this country can rely upon to resolve their problems with great expertise, but very importantly, free of charge. We look forward to a further engagement with not only individual taxpayers, but also with stakeholders, various professions, and indeed with SARS and members of the public. We're all with the minister, and last but not least, and very importantly, with the relevant parliamentary committee, that is Committee on Finance, and look forward to support from all angles to grow and strengthen this office. Thank you.
Well, there we go. There's some background for you about the tax ombud. But here in live in person, looking not so tired and very awake, is the judge himself.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I wasn't actually tired. Have you ever seen somebody who is very angry, but trying not to show that they are angry, restraining themselves all the time? I was very angry when I made that interview, and I didn't want to show. Mail and Guardian, thank you very much. And, this is an act of patriotism on their part to try and make this country a better place for everybody. We are glad for their collaboration. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. Yes, the clip just tried to give you the context, but let me give it a little bit more fully. Why do we need that structural independence, which I'll define a little bit later? We need it because this is a public office. The way things are working now, and please be careful, when you assess the need whether or not the office should be structurally independent, don't look at its performance, because that could mislead you. Don't say, oh, it's working very well, you have been doing very well, you have been handling so many cases and so forth and so on, efficiently and so on. Therefore, you don't need any independence of the kind that you are asking for, because that office is working well, not because it's structurally independent, but because of the mutual respect between myself and every one of the commissioners that serve there, starting with Mr. Moyani to Mark Kingon when he acted, and right up to the current commissioner. The offices are working well because of that mutual respect. But you have heard what I said. I'm leaving end of September 2022, and who's going to be the next tax ombud? It may be someone else. I don't want the efficiency of the office to be dependent on the goodwill of a commissioner who in turn shows that goodwill in relation to myself as an individual. No public office should survive on the little reputation and renown of a poor individual like myself, because I'm going not to be there at one time. So we want an office that would survive on a legal basis. Even if tomorrow I could make the commissioner angry, which I may have to if the need arises, he will not be able to shut down the office, which he can, by the way, as things stand right now. Now, is that what we need? Is that the kind of office that we need? No, that is not. And what is this independence that I'm talking about? You can have a judge sitting in a court deciding on a case. You are not going to prescribe to a judge how the judge must decide that case. But the judiciary will not be independent, even if judges were to do that. If it was for the minister to appoint a judge, if it was for the minister to dismiss a judge, would you say there is judicial independence? No, there wouldn't be judicial independence. The kind of independence I'm talking about is not intellectual independence. It doesn't matter to me whether the commissioner can shut down the office tomorrow or not. If my mind tells me this, you must tell the SARS that this is wrong, I'll tell SARS so. Any one of the people working in my office, even though their salaries in effect are paid by SARS, won't hesitate to make a finding against SARS in dealing with a complaint for fear that SARS would take away their salaries. That would inhibit them from doing the right thing. They are all intellectually honest. But that does not mean that the situation is ideal. It's not enough that we should just be intellectually free and honest and so on and independent. We need the office as an institution. So when we come here to talk about and we express our concern about lack of independence. We are not talking lack of intellectual independence. That we command. My staff command that in great measure. It is the structure that we are talking about. The structure which will not allow, say, the commissioner to say, tomorrow I shut down this office because you guys are too good, they're harassing me. That is the kind of thing that we want. So let us define it and understand it in that way. But I owe it to you as to why I called you here today. And part of my accounting duties in that respect is to give you a little bit of a history of the effort that I expended over the few years in trying to get this office to where I would like it to be. Believe it or not, this is the third year now. Since 2.5 years ago, it all started with Mr. Nene, and I said to Mr. Nene, let us get this office to this. I sent in, perhaps before I do that, I should acknowledge that some changes that I suggested, legal amendments, were effected to the Act through Parliament. But that were not good enough. So I said to Mr. Nene when he was still there, I said, well, I think we must get this office, give it structural independence. And I said, well, let me do something about it. We engaged the services of what people call GTEC. I don't know if it's GTEC or GINTEC, whatever, but Government Technical Advice Center, which advised us on possible. I commissioned them to make an investigation as to what format, appropriate format, this office should take, how should be structured, so that it has legal personality and it can function independently of SARS. They made some intensive study into that. That study cost millions, and they came out with a report and made recommendations. Two main recommendations. The first I call ideal, the second perhaps less ideal, but I could live with. But the ideal one could have been more costly. Option B would be fine, but was less costly. And I said, well, we will see what we can do. But I took that report. I submitted to Mr. Nen and said, well, intensive studies has been made, recommendations made, millions spent to say this office should be structured in this way. I write, no response. I write, no response. I write, again, listen, gentlemen, no response. I've been writing and writing and writing. Nene left. The new minister came in. Gigaba came in. No response. The other minister came in, the present minister came in. I wrote and wrote and attached all those reports and said to them, this is where we are. This is the stage where we are. Let us work on this. I'm saying no response. And I appeared before the parliamentary committee. I explained to them that I wrote and wrote, here are the letters, no response. They said, really? We'll have to ask the minister to come. And they said, well, how can you depend on SARS for funds when you are in fact some kind of oversight? I said, well, that is the anomaly of the situation. So that this cannot be right. We'll ask the minister. Well, they put me down on the agenda to discuss the issue in December, and lo and behold, for reasons not known to me, it was removed from the agenda of the portfolio committee. So, and I said, well, I would not be deterred from doing what I've got to do. I owe it to the people of this country to create a viable office that would be independent and that would help them. So, the next thing that I thought of was to have this kind of discussion, a platform like this, so we can talk about these issues and talk frankly as to whether or not there's a need for this office to be structurally independent. The reason why I'm harvesting your wisdom on this issue is precisely the point that I'm making. This office is not for Bernard Makabo Webb. No, it is not my office. It belongs to the public. Who am I to be so presumptuous to say, I've spoken to the people of South Africa, they say they want an independent office. I don't want to be that presumptuous. I want to be able to say, I've spoken to the people, stakeholders, people who understand the issue of tax. I've spoken to them and these are their views. Some of them say, well, you don't need that kind of independence. You're fine as you are. Others say, no, we agree with the notion that this office needs to be structurally independent. At the end of this discussion, and this is not going to be a talk show, at the end of this discussion, your contributions and discussions and views are going to be collated, put together, and I'm going to be able to say to whoever is going to have to listen to me that it's not just coming from me. Believe you me, we had a workshop, and this is the product of that workshop. In other words, it is an informed product. And therefore, when I say this is what we need, when I say we don't need that independence, then it would have been the product of that forum. Similarly, if I were to say we do need that independence, I'd be relying on the product of this forum. I'm saying this, ladies and gentlemen, because I want you to understand that the office feels very strongly about this issue that it should be talked about. But we don't want to arrogate to ourselves the monopoly of wisdom. We want to pick your brains on this issue. We want to hear your views on this issue, which we are going to value very highly. I know I'm not the only office that is experiencing frustrations. I see my colleague, Judge President Khomu here. He's the inspector of police. I know, I read in the article in the newspapers that he's supposed to be the Ombuds of police to see to it that the police are doing their work properly and so forth and so on. But no, he's the Minister of Police, I read in the newspaper. It's not giving him money to do that. He's not organizing secretariat for that, so that he's not able to carry out his job properly. He has been in contact with Mr. Taylor trying to do that so that people who have got complaints against the police and so forth can go to the police ombud, some kind of police ombud. He's not getting anywhere. But Judge Khomu, I'm not like you. I don't have the bravery that you have at this point, because I heard you wanted to take up the minister to court. We may meet there, I don't know. But I want to make sure that I hear from the people like your good selves on this important issue. So the issues have been, the parameters have been set out in a document. Some of you may not have, but the panel is in possession of that document. And, finally, it's a pity, and it hurts me that when you are told that you are a tax ombud, but you cannot be admitted into the international body of tax ombuds. Why? Because we, as the international body, have looked at your situation. You are not independent enough. So, as South Africa's tax ombud, your office does not qualify to be a member of the international body because structurally you are not independent. it's a sad thing that we should find ourselves still at this age in that kind of situation. Such international conferences that I happen to be attending, like the one I'm invited to attend in Vienna next week for the second time, next month rather. I don't know if the minister would allow. I'm invited not because we have got a sound, structurally admissible Ombuds office, tax Ombuds office, admissible, in other words, admissible to membership, but simply because somehow I manage to be known a little bit here and there by some people outside the country, and they said, well, that office, we don't recognize it, but Bernard, that chap, we know him. Let's invite him. He's a busybody. He's a busybody. He will come and say a few things here. Now, the next person who comes into this office may not be that little known Bernard Mwepe, maybe somebody else they don't know. Is that how the office should operate? No. No self-respecting national office should operate on the basis of the reputation or renown of an individual, because when that person goes, the office will go. That's not what we want. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Judge Mwepe, for highlighting the issues and concerns regarding the office at the moment. Some of the practical things that he highlighted we'll touch on now in the discussion, and I think at this point I'd like to ask the panelists to please come and join me on stage so that we can discuss all of these issues in a little bit more detail. It all sounds good and hanky-dory and simple, but we've been discussing this for over the last week, and to be honest, it's not as simple as we thought, but it can be. So let's go into that. While they're going on to stage, I think it's appropriate to say the law is not written for when things go right. It's written for when things go wrong. And I think that's the situation that we're sitting in now, is at the moment everything is going right. The law might not be great, but it's not catering for situations where things are going wrong. And should it? And that's the question that we're going to be discussing now. So welcome to our panelists. We've tried to get them from all different sectors to join us so we get a holistic view. And if we start with our first one to my left, I think most of he's been on TV and radio and everywhere. It's Wayne Duvenage, and I'm just going to read a little bit of introduction for each of those, and then we're going to go into the nitty-gritties of what we're going to be discussing. So much of Wayne's working life was spent in transport and tourism industries, where he served as the chief executive at Avis from 2007 to 2012. He's also occupied board member positions at the SA Vehicle Renting and Leasing Association and the Tourism Business Council of Africa. Wayne chaired OTA during the inception period from 2012 to 2015, while it tackled government's introduction e-toll scheme as a 3-person team. In 2006, he became the CEO as the became the CEO of the organization that expanded to 50 people. That's by 2020, and he's under the broader mandate, and it's now called the Organization Undoing Tax Abuse. Today, OTA is regarded as a leading civil organization in challenging the abuse of authority within the public sector. And Wayne was schooled in KwaZulu-Natal and is a BSc graduate at the University of Natal. He describes himself as an entrepreneur, activist, writer, speaker, and family man, all harbored in one restless soul. I love that. His favorite quote is by Tyler Scott, who once said, "It's generally unwise to leave those who created the problem in charge of finding the solution." Welcome, Wayne. Let's give him a hand, please. Next to him, we have, and we try to split it male, female, our gorgeous ladies sitting on the stage. The first one is Advocate Lucia Hlongwane. Welcome. She's the founding and managing director of Walina Africa Capital, Pty Limited. She was previously the Africa tax leader at EY and a member of the Africa and South Africa executive committees. She's an admitted advocate of the High Court of South Africa and a well-regarded tax professional emerged as a new generation thought leader. She previously served as Barclays Africa Group Head of Tax, covering 12 African countries, and before then spent 7 years with Shell Oil Products, the last 5 of which she was the Africa Head of Tax, covering more than 30 countries. She was the tax legal advisor during the disposal of Shell Africa entities to Viva Energy. Lucia spent several years with SARS in different roles, including litigation of tax cases and as senior tax specialist on various SARS projects. She was the deputy chairperson of the first Employment Equity Committee at SARS. With more than 20 years of working experience, she has a solid background of leading teams of cross-country experts across the continent, including senior leaders, where she was accountable for the overall performance of the tax function, tax policy, governance, and risk and strategic direction. Her expertise includes managing tax risk, negotiations and settlement, cross-border restructuring and refinancing, mergers and acquisitions, tax planning, and transfer pricing. Welcome. Our next guest, who I know quite well, is Pieter Faber. He's the Senior Executive of Tax at SAICA, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, he has more than 16 years of experience in tax law and policy, and is responsible for managing the tax function in relation to SAICA's more than 46,000 members for both tax advocacy, tax professional development, and tax operational support. The tax advocacy function is conducted on behalf of the profession in collaboration with the SAICA National Tax Committee and includes engagement with various stakeholders such as the media, the Tax Ombud, SARS, National Treasury, and Parliament. Short and sweet, Peter. Welcome. And last but not least, I think all of you also know her very well, it's Deborah Tickle. She's an adjunct associate professor at the University of Cape Town, where she teaches the Tax Masters course. As managing partner of the tax department at KPMG Cape Town, she led the tax team there for more than 10 of the 31 years she spent consulting to large listed and global clients of the firm. She serves on the Davis Tax Committee, formed by the Minister of Finance, to establish where the South African tax policy aligns and supports overall government policy. She also served on the National Tax Committee of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, 1 year as the Deputy Chair, and she continues to serve on the Southern Region Tax Committee. Welcome, Deborah. Okay, so as we mentioned, the judge has now gone into the problems, and maybe just to quickly highlight the problems that he mentioned. SARS, in terms of his view, controls the Office of the Tax Ombud's finances. It pays their staff salaries, it controls their staff, the discipline, it can dismiss them, etc. They're subject to the SARS policies, which is in terms of the SARS Act, and even the lease agreements that the Office of the Tax Ombud has to enter into for their premises where they currently are in Pretoria is in the name of SARS. So we know that Section 16 of the Tax Administration Act clearly says, in discharging his or her mandate, the tax ombud must act independently, and that's obviously independently of SARS. So the question, and I'm going to start off with you, Wayne, just from your own personal perspective, what do you think, or do you perceive that the public regards the Office of the Tax Ombud as being truly independent from SARS?
To be honest, I don't think the public are aware of the Tax Ombuds Office. Largely speaking, I'm saying that. Understanding what we've heard here today, I would say no, the independence isn't there. You cannot have the organization you're holding to account and working on behalf of the public in solving issues that they have with SARS, and then at the same time SARS having any say, even down to your own lease agreements, your disciplinary processes, paying of your salaries and so forth, being part of that interaction with the Ombuds Office. So the short answer to that is the independence isn't there. And if we make this more aware and the actual role of the Ombuds Office to the public, I think that they'll also gather that that's not the case. Without a doubt, we need to see how we can address that today. But I think from a public's point of view, independence is critical, especially in oversight entities like the Ombuds Office. We've also seen Ombuds offices in other areas where there are problems with regards to them. I think we're very fortunate we have the judge in his space here, and this is the time to fix that, because it's not always the case. Who's in power today, who's in charge today is not in charge tomorrow. Things go south very quickly. We've seen that before. So this is the time to fix that.
Great, thanks, Wayne. And is this lack of independence, is it hindering taxpayers from actually going to the office with their complaints, or are they still, despite all of this, still using the office of the tax ombud? Does it have a major impact on what they're doing?
As I said earlier, I think there's a lot more work to be done by both the Ombuds office and SARS to get the message out there to the taxpayer of their rights and the use of this office. I think that's pretty largely a secret in this country, if you understand how long the tax ombuds office has been around. Now, for the tax ombud to do that work, to just spend the money in marketing, advertising, getting the message out there, and to have the SARS office tapping on his shoulder saying, no, don't spend the money in that space, is a conflict. So there's work to be done.
Yeah, great. I mean, I know we've been involved with some of their media, so they are definitely working on that, but I agree. I think it is something that needs to reach the man on the street. At the moment, it's reaching a few of us, but not everybody. Lucia, from your point of view, what do you think the public perception is of the independence of the Office of the Tax Ombud?
Thank you, Sharon. I think that from the taxpayers that I have dealt with, they know that the tax ombudsman, but then they don't really have the confidence to approach the office because they feel that this is an office within SARS. So if I want to go to court, I would rather just approach advocates and go to court. Why am I reporting SARS to SARS? So that's how they see this. And there are many examples where SARS has not done things the right way in terms of time frames, exercising of a discretion or whatever, but they don't think that they can rely on the tax ombudsman as it is currently structured.
Sure. Okay, so there is the concern out there. There is a problem at this stage that we can pick up from the general public with this lack of independence teams. But I think it all comes back to the bigger picture, or the actual nitty-gritty is not the bigger picture, and that's on the legal framework. And just going back to the public perception, I mean, I'm just listening to the judge now not being allowed to be admitted to, or being disqualified from being admitted to the International Association of Tax Ombudsmen. Clearly that perception is there that the office is not. So it might, even if it's not locally, internationally, the perception is there that they're not actually independent, and that needs to be addressed, of course. Okay, Peter, before I start with Peter, how many lawyers do we have in the room? Okay, good, because we are going to call on your expertise. Peter's also a lawyer, and that's why we've given the hard questions to him, because this all comes down actually to the legal structure of the office and how it is currently structured and how we are actually going to change this. So, Peter, before going into the nitty-gritty about the detail, we talk about the independence of the Office of the Tax Ombud, but what does this actually mean from a legislative perspective? Are they not legally independent, or are they legally independent? Where do we even start this discussion to consider this?
Thank you, Sharon. I think just to give some context, because that will inform some of the, as you said, the legalese. I think from psycho side, you'd want to be in a position where the shame of a complaint is enough to be disincentive, like we have in Japan. But I don't think that's necessarily our reality. And secondly, when we deal with the issue of independence, that we then look at its constituency. So that we have people who are independent in mind, or you trust that people are independent in mind on the one hand. That's why when you have marriage difficulties, you don't go to your mother-in-law. You don't believe she'll be independent in mind. But there are also certain, as Judge referred to, called structural, the environment that contributes to this on the one hand. So is the environment that you have such that we can believe that you are independent in mind? But that also informs a second question when we look at it, is necessary, does the environment unlock your ability to be effective and efficient? Because that, too, again, talks to the independence thereof. I think when we started this process, and having had the benefit of being part of this process and the journey of the office, we all on a big picture had a bit of an idea what we wanted, and there was a lot of debate up and down, and we had to figure out where we position this between what was then the SARS Monitoring Office and the Public Protector, and how does this compare? And I think the question of independence, or even perceived independence, has always been a problem, hence the continual discussion, which we then saw coming in the 2016 amendments, some refinements. But I think, even though, once again, we all seem to have an idea on the big picture, when we started dabbling in this process into the detail, we all started asking questions I think we probably should have asked a lot earlier, is when you actually trace something from a legal point of view, does the one thing inform the other thing? So does the legislation give you, one, the independence, and what does that mean, as you said? So when we had the pre-2016 legislation, you had a position where the Ombud had the right or the power to appoint, but in terms of SARS, after consultation with the Commissioner, we then deleted the part involving the Commissioner, or so we thought. And the question then starts, well, what does it legally mean that the Ombud appoints staff in terms of the SARS Act? When, one, the SARS Act does not make itself subservient to the TAA, and secondly, people are appointed in terms of the SARS Act by the Commissioner. So who is actually appointing? And when you look at the actual fact, well, it seems that in practice, it's applied that the Commissioner does the appointing. And I think that already nullifies the purpose of the first section, that the Ombud appoints his own staff. So I think the practice and the law seem to be a bit unclear who does that and how do you actually reconcile that position. The second, obviously, when you talk about the environment or structural independence, when we started looking at that, the question is, well, SARS is a scheduled entity. It broke away from National Treasury in the middle of the 1990s with the SARS Act in 1997. Prior to that, it was a subset. And that then resulted, thereafter we had what they call the Public Finance Management Act that then dealt with. And when we started looking at this and saying, but how does this operate? So the law says the Ombud's budget is approved by the Minister. And we said, okay, but how do you take that back to the appropriations process through Parliament, through the PFMA? And that was unclear. So in practice, we know that it's allocated from SARS. The question is, but SARS is a scheduled entity, namely it itself has a separate appropriation and approval process through Parliament. How can the Minister approve something that is within the scope of Parliament? Which made no sense. At most, the Minister should be approving things allocated out of Treasury's budget as approved and appropriated by Parliament. So the legislation didn't seem to tie up. I think the third was, well, we talk about the office of the tax ombud, but is it an office? Because even the empowering legislation talks about the tax ombud, and the office speaks to it incidentally. But unlike, for example, the SARS Act, where we say that there is a SARS and a commissioner of SARS, and they have the following powers to open bank accounts, to do certain things. The commissioner is the accounting officer. We have none of that from a jurisprudence point of view in relation to the office of the tax ombud. So the question we first raised, well, is this a juridical person? Can this office do things in law?
So if we look at the law, though, the law says in that thing the powers of the Ombud is basically just to appoint staff. That's it. There's no additional criteria other than its mandate.
Yeah, well, it says to appoint staff, but when you look at the legislation, it actually seems to revert back to the Commissioner has the right to appoint the staff. And that seems to be what's happening in practice as well. So there seems to be a lot of anomalies legally in this, and I think that to a large extent is something we need to expand on while we go through this independence, but also addressing the anomalies as to what we are seeking when we talk about independence.
Yeah, so at the moment we've got the SARS Act saying one thing, we've got the Tax Administration Act saying the other, and we don't know which one takes preference, or is the SARS Act stronger than the other one? We're not quite sure. So there's three issues there I think Peter raised. Is first of all the employment of staff, the budget allocation, who approves it, etc., and then the office itself. How is that actually formed, incorporated, and run? Where does that power come from? Is it the TAA? Is it the PFMA? Is it the SARS Act? How does all of this, what is it? It's not a separate, and to be honest, I didn't know any of the stuff before I started, so I had to read about it, but the Public Finance Management Act creates these scheduled entities, as Peter was talking about, and SARS is one of those scheduled entities. And if you look on that schedule, there are other ombuds officers on that schedule as well. So the question is, why is the tax ombud not on that schedule? What has happened that it hasn't got a particular schedule to be separately independent? So the concerns are quite, it's quite interesting because, I mean, in law, it seems as though there is some sort of clarity, but not really. The approval from the minister is there, but it's not seeming to flow that way, especially with the appointment of staff. Now, Deborah, you've been on the Davis Tax Committee, which published a report that was given to the Minister of Finance in 2017, and Chapter 5 of that report on tax administration dealt with the Office of the Tax Ombud. Now, it highlighted several other issues and international jurisdictions that you guys looked at while you were deliberating the creation of this office. Can you maybe just touch on some of the other jurisdictions? What are they doing? How is their Office of the Ombud set up? Is it similar? Is it completely different? Any indication of how they're doing it?
Okay, thanks. So I took the Davis Tax Committee as the initiator of the countries that I looked at, and then I also added Canada. So what I found was that there is a spectrum of the way that tax ombud offices are set up. And there's the difference between perception and actual. So most of the offices tend to try and implicate that they are independent even when they're not. So if we go firstly to the US, for example, they have the tax advocate. And Nina Olson is a fairly strong personality. I don't know who's met her. I have. She has a very strong personality. And she is the tax advocate.
Oh, she's actually retired now. She retired last year, August. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So not somebody new. But yeah. I met Nina Olson. So
yes, no, she is amazing.
But she was extremely strong.
Yeah.
And it's 20 years old, the tax advocate in America. And I think the independence that they take is the fact that, or that the tax advocate in America takes, is the fact that she or he has the right to report directly to the House of Representatives and the Senate without any interference from the IRS commissioner. However, if you go back into where or how that office is created, it is actually housed within the IRS. It's controlled by the IRS, and she reports to the IRS. And if she wants to appoint people, she has to actually put that through a committee at the IRS. So although there is this perceived independence in America, it isn't really there either. But obviously, again, as the judge said, if you have strong personalities, then you're lucky because they will take their independence. Moving on to other jurisdictions, then one can perhaps look at Canada. Now, in Canada, the creation of the tax ombud was not through the IRS, but basically through the government. But when one, again, if you go to the website, they say we're independent, etc., etc. But again, you find that they are actually housed within the Canadian Revenue Authority, and they report directly to the minister. And the minister there has no obligation, although he does report generally to the government, they have no obligation to report to the government. So again, there's a question on that independence. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Australia, where we have the General Inspectorate of Taxes. And that was created much later than the US scenario. And it was created separately from the Australian Revenue Authority, and it also has financial independence. So although if you were to look at what the terms of reference are for the Australian Inspector of Taxes, or General Inspector of Taxes, who is the equivalent of our Ombud, although it looks the same as our Ombud, there is financial independence, and that's very, very important, and they are able to appoint their own people. So the reality is they do have independence. And then we move on to Mexico, which is the complete other end of the spectrum, because again, they are created absolutely separately. It's called the Prodecon, and they have very, very wide mandate. So not only do they look at administrative issues and issue a report that is based on administrative issues, but they also are able to act as an arbitrator. So almost like our ADR situation, they would act as the arbitrator, and they are able to represent taxpayers up to a certain limit who are not able to pay for representation. Now, I don't think that we would want our tax ombud to go that far. I'm sure he wouldn't want to himself. But the point is that there's this broad spectrum of perceived and real independence. And the interesting thing about the Mexican Prodicon is that they've issued reports saying that they believe that the fact that they are there to assist taxpayers to even that balance, because the tax authorities had huge powers, just like our own, and the balance was very unequal. And they've helped to equal that balance and create more trust in the whole system. And as a consequence, they've seen an improvement in tax morality. So the improvement in tax morality and obviously then tax compliance would then presumably increase tax revenue. So we talk about, well, there could be a cost potentially to having independence in our South African tax ombud, but the benefit might outweigh the cost, because if there is an improved level of trust and morality in the ombud who will be overseeing the South African Revenue Service, then there is a potential for increased tax revenue.
Thanks, Deborah. Lucia, I haven't had time to actually go into this, but from an African perspective, are there other countries that have absolutely nothing or have something, just off the top of your head, if you know of countries?
I looked at Nigeria, and they are a bit confused. They don't actually even understand
Awesome.
the tax ombudsman. They talk about the tribunal and all of that. And I looked at Kenya as well. They don't.
Okay.
So they're really far from where we are.
Yeah. So Peter, getting back to you on this, how does the Ombud, I mean, if we look locally, if we come back locally to the other Ombuds offices in South Africa, I mentioned that there were two other ones on the schedule. It's called the Community Schemes Ombud and the Office of the Ombud for Financial Service Providers. What are the additional steps that the Ombuds office would have to do to actually get onto that schedule as a scheduled public entity?
Well, Sharon, I think when you look at all that, there's a myriad of ombuds, depending, some of them are actually private sector ombuds, and they actually create certain MPOs, etc., and some of them are in the government space. By definition, you have criteria where you would require an enabling act, so something that creates a persona. You would require accountability to Parliament and an appropriation from Parliament. So by definition, those are the three criteria that you would have. So if we look at this, we probably have a quasi position where we can say that the office is created by the Administration Act, even though, as I said, there are some anomalies in there. Does it receive funds from an appropriation from Parliament? Well, indirectly it does. It's funded by taxpayer money, but probably not directly. So once again, it's there but not really there. And the last is obviously, once again, does it report to Parliament, or is it subsequent to the authority of Parliament? And there again, the strict answer is no, even though they report to the Minister, and the Minister is then required to table it. So once again, through the back door, we do have some form of parliamentary oversight. So on both three criteria, those are the three criteria, both of them, we're, as people used to say, half pregnant. And I think that's part of this case is, how do we clean that up to make sure that we either one way or the other?
Okay.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
I think the law, I mean, I hadn't looked, I knew about the TAA, obviously when one works in tax you look at the TAA, but I hadn't looked at the SARS Act and the PFMA, and Peter kindly educated me over the course of the last few days. But whether the TAA or the PFMA or the SARS Act do or don't technically give independence to the Office of the Tax Ombud, the fact is that this wouldn't be raised if Judge Nairobi felt that there were independence. He wouldn't be asking this question. He obviously feels there is a risk that whatever the mandate is could be overridden by the fact that there is this oversight effectively, or accountability through SARS. So to me, the laws all need to be cleared up to make it very, very clear where the accountability lies. And that's why I believe they do need an independence, despite the cost.
Yeah, we'll get onto the cost now. Lucia, yes.
The challenge we have as South Africans as well. The challenge we have. Can I find a minute? The challenge we have as South Africans as well is the fact that we copy and paste. We go outside and we say this is international best practice. It's not the case. We need to think about what suits us in South Africa, not necessarily going and just copying and pasting what we think works, because it doesn't necessarily work for us.
You see from the international work that I've looked at, that there is this broad spectrum, so we can pick and choose in reality.
Yeah, and I think South Africa's never got a one-step solution. We always seem to have more than one to cater for all our scenarios. Wayne, getting back to you, I mean, both the judge and Deborah now mentioned it, the actual costs of actually establishing this office to make sure it's completely structurally independent means its appointment is done by the OTO or the minister, the parliament, whoever it may be, the running of the office, the staff costs, the IT infrastructure, the performance appraisals, all that kind of stuff, to separate that out of SARS, because currently we've heard in practice it's part of SARS. They're running on their IT systems, they're following all their policies and procedures. To take that out and to become an independent office, truly independent, and I know you mentioned that the GTAC, Government Tax Advisory Centre, did give the office two options, and I think one is with shared services, one with not shared services, and I think that's what they refer to. I'm not sure, but we'll get clarity on that a bit later. But the cost of doing that, I've heard some numbers thrown around, and I've heard the number of about 10 million rand it will actually cost to get this independence. Do you think the taxpayers, I mean, the economy we know is in not a very good shape at the moment, will we have enough revenue, or will taxpayers be willing to tell the government to give this 10 million rand to make the tax office, Ombuds office, truly independent?
Yes. It's not a matter of, 10 million rand in the greater scheme of things is minuscule. We heard earlier on about tax morality. You'll get that money back very quickly. If you have to spend money to ensure independence, then you spend that money. If you have to spend a little bit more, then you spend a little bit more. You need to ensure that oversight, especially when it plays into the hands of the public, and the tax-paying public, you must understand our tax base is very skewed. Also listening to the comments on international examples, our local political situation here is very different. We've had a situation where the abuse of power has shown how much damage it does. And this is why it's critical that oversight entities are extremely independent. We rely on personalities, yes, in other countries. We rely on them here. Fortunately, in Thuli Madonsela's case, a strong personality stood up. We see a reversal of that. So we really are relying too much on personalities and not enough on stringent processes that enable the independence. So if it's going to cost 10 million, if it's going to cost 20 million rand, we need that. That's far more important, so that the taxpayer has the relief and the understanding of its strength, and we can hold SARS to account. Because remember, you might have a good SARS office today, but if you have another situation that we've had in the past, and they start abusing their powers, we need an extremely strong tax ombudsman. So that money will be well spent.
Great. Now, Lucia, with independence of lack of confidentiality. I mean, the whole access to taxpayer information was in the news recently. SARS, we know, has a very strict, its act is, strict confidentiality of taxpayer information. How do you think that this gaining independence for the office will affect taxpayer information and confidentiality?
Sharon, I don't think it should. Remember that confidentiality is at the cornerstone of any tax system. So taxpayers have to continue to rely on trust, on the fact that their relationship with SARS, whatever they disclose to SARS, remains confidential. So for me, my understanding is that currently the tax ombudsman has access to taxpayer information. So yes, if we're creating a separate legal persona, we should be able to transport those confidentiality provisions into the operations of the tax ombudsman.
Okay, great. Now, Deborah, the allegations made against the Office of the Tax Ombud, and this does feature more on the mandate side, which I know we're not going to address, but I think it does have an impact on the independence of the office. The view is out there that the Office of the Tax Ombud doesn't have teeth. So none of their recommendations that they make to SARS are binding. They don't have to do anything at this stage. well, depending on what they say, but they don't have to follow what the Office of the Ombud recommends. Now, it can't instruct SARS to comply with these recommendations, but how does this, would this have any impact on the independence, if at all? Not having any teeth at this stage, or will independence improve this?
I would suspect that this would improve it. All of the jurisdictions I looked at don't have the ability to, they don't have a sort of legal ability to say to SARS, you must act this way, or their own revenue authority, act this way or act that way. They have the ability to report, be it through the minister or through to the relevant government. Now, obviously, if we have structural independence, then there will be a direct report through to government, which can then, if necessary, enact legislation that might deal with a particular issue, particularly the systemic issues. From the point of view of would it detract from independence? I don't think it would detract from independence. One of the things that is already in the TAA is in Section 20 is that SARS has to, within 30 days, advise the tax ombud as to what action they've taken. Now, I don't know whether SARS adheres to that 30 days. They don't seem to. Sorry, SARS, if anybody's in the room. They don't seem to adhere to their required numbers of days for acting in certain ways. And that needs to be enforced. Yep. Unfortunately, I don't know if the tax ombud actually has the ability to enforce that 30 days. Thereafter, it's up to the tax ombud when he gets back to the taxpayer. In my view, there should be a further period of time within which the taxpayer must be informed. Now, this is what happened, and this is what the decision is of SARS, and why. Because that's the important thing. Most taxpayers who feel unfairly dealt with either are being unfairly dealt with or aren't. And often it will be that they're not. It's just that they don't understand what the situation is. So it's a case of resolving this and explaining to them, this is the situation, it's either going to go this way or it's going to go that way, and this is why. To me, that would then improve the credibility of the tax ombud and of SARS. And that's where your tax morality comes in, because there is a voice that is people feel should be heard. Yeah. Just out of interest, the Prodicon have, in terms of the rules for the Prodicon, is 72 hours.
Sure.
They have to come back within 72 hours.
Yeah.
Just to acknowledge, I guess, to say we've received this and this is what's happening, but they do have to respond back. So I think that it's a lot of it is about perception as well as reality. Yeah. And I think if we can give the independence to the Ombud, the Office of the Tax Ombud, and then they can actually enact some of the, or pursue some of the laws that they're given.
Great. So I think I think what you're all saying is the perception is not there that they're independent. The independence is not there. However, the law is not clear either on whether this independence is there or not. It's like what they call in Afrikaans a mengelbus. It's a little bit here, a little bit there. It's sitting all over the show. So we don't have pure clarity on what this office is. We kind of know what its mandate is, but we don't know what it is in law as an entity as such. We kind of know who it reports to, but it's not happening the way the law says in practice. So the question that we're asking you, and I'm going to open it up now, is does the legislation actually give independence to the Office of the Tax Ombud as it stands at the moment? And what we've heard from the panel is that in some cases, yes, in other cases, no. In some cases, we actually don't know which act is stronger than the other one. What needs to be done in order to change this? And I think that's the important part that we want you to discuss in the breakaway sessions. But before we do that, I want to open it up to the floor. Do any of you have questions regarding this? Yes, we've got one there. We have a roaming mic.
Sharon, yeah. I'd like to just add to the discussion about the costs, because it is taxpayers are being called upon more and more and more. We're talking about the budget at the moment and how much more tax and where it's going to come from. That one of the things that I took note of from the most recent report from the Tax Ombud, who is very, very good in his reporting, so we see a lot of what's going on, is that for both the past year and the 2019 year, the Office of the Tax Ombud came in under budget by 6 million in the 2018 and by 5 million, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 2019 financial years. Now, whether that was because they were restricted from spending money by the Commissioner or whether because they were very thrifty and careful in their spending, but the point is that there is budget there to actually spend, even if it's not sufficient to cover the entire cost of going completely independent. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name and organization.
My name is Andile Kotashe. I'm from the SAPC. I'm here in my individual capacity. Judge, the Lord giveth, but the taxman taketh. From the days of the Old Testament, we all know the story of the guy who went to Christ, and Christ had to pronounce, give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and unto the Lord what belongs to the Lord. But on a more serious note, we need the office of the tax ombudsman. But especially to fight for the small man. Because there are a lot of, the SARS office is riddled with a lot of inefficiencies. It is riddled with a lot of incompetencies. And it is manned by people who are very mechanical in their thinking. Let us say you have a dispute, for example. You'll be shunted from pillar to post. Go to this office, submit this form. Sometimes it borders on duplication. You do that, you keep to the letter and the spirit of that agreement, but it doesn't get actioned. It's worse if you have to do what we would refer to in legal parlance as a taxpayer, pursuant to the Act of 2000, to say, I pray that, that they don't understand those efficacies, So in the process, what you do, you want to resort to this last line of defense. Your last line of defense is the tax ombudsman, right? But it would seem, even at its inception, the forms are also mired in some sort of bureaucracy. Now, I just want to pose the question to the judge. What is the turnaround time for a complaint that comes to SARS? And it would seem to me, the spirit says from the ombudsman, you must have exhausted all the mechanisms with SARS before you can actually lay a complaint with it. But it doesn't get, your complaint or your dispute doesn't get actioned. So it is important, therefore, that judge, the relationship between the taxman, between the tax ombudsman and the small man, who is the tax-paying person, moves from a premise of trust. And one way in which you can actually do that is by coming up with a lot of public awareness campaigns, with a lot of advocacy campaigns, where you become visible, you become known. And in that way, it can actually engender a better sense of confidence into this office. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Andile. So you also punting for more media, more outreach?
Yes,
getting them.
Definitely.
Yeah, I know they're working hard at it. They definitely are, but more traveling for you, Judge. I see coming up.
BC offering that for free for the Tax Ombud office. Sorry.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Amanda.
Judge, I just want to get back to the report. And all of the questions that's been asked here today, are none of those questions answered in the report that we've already paid millions for? Second of all, if that report giving you options to transform or get a new structure in place, if nobody's listening to that report and your efforts to get that report accepted somewhere, why would workshops like this make any difference? And this is also costing money.
Judge, would you care to answer that one, or no?
Perhaps in all fairness, can I also respond to
yes, please.
The gentleman from SABC? You know, and general on the issue of money, I don't think money is an issue here. I don't think the problem is that there is no money to give that office the structure that requires. I think the problem is lack of political will. That is all. Because as Wayne has said, you spend that little amount of money, it would turn out to be a huge investment because people begin to have confidence in the entire system because they'll feel they're being treated fairly, in the sense that if they're not being treated fairly, then they know where to go to an independent institution to ensure that they're treated fairly. And in the process, you encourage tax compliance. I don't think there's a single South African who says, I don't want to pay tax, irrespective of how much I earn. I'm not interested in paying tax. I don't think so. I think the issue is how we treat our taxpayers. It's a very fundamental issue. And the independence of the Office of the Tax Ombud goes directly to that point. Well, you speak of perhaps going around and, educating people about this office and the like. And you are quite right. You need money to do that. And yes, that's the point. What if SARS says, no, I'm not giving you money to go to Polokwane on a campaign, as you have done? It's a very valid point. Wherever we go, we find increasingly that people are ignorant of not only the Office of the Tax Ombud, but certainly also ignorant of their rights, that they've got certain rights in relation to the payment of tax, which is why we even thought of sometime ourselves setting up a table of their rights, or call it Bill of Rights or whatever. The power that SARS has is huge, and we need to bring about that kind of equilibrium. I'm not advocating for the Office of the Tax Ombud to find itself on a higher scale or level than SARS. No, which is why people talk about teeth and the like, and I said, it's fine if you've got some teeth, but I don't think I need to have a shark's teeth. Well, if I've got the tooth of a hen, it's fine. Why should I have sharp teeth when I deal with what is supposed to be a respectable national institution? If a word comes out from the Office of the Tax Ombud, a reasoning comes from there, it's well-founded, it's legally sound, it says, we recommend you do this. If that recommendation is sound and legally founded, why should another state institution in the form of SARS not carry out that recommendation without being threatened with imprisonment? Responsible people in this country, I assume we put, or am I wrong? Responsible people, only responsible people in senior positions. Responsible people are people who take the interests of the country to heart. Responsible people who have got to appreciate the kind of responsibility that is spread over their shoulders and do what is reasonably expected of them. It's not reasonable to behave in the fashion that, I'm occupying this office. A report is coming from the Tax Ombud Judge Mwepe. There is no law which says I must do what he's telling me to do. Even though the report is sound, is good, is reasonable, I elect not to implement it. That is being irresponsible. When you have got the right people in the right places, the previous chairperson of the committee, asked me, Judge Webb, what do you think we should do? I forgot his name, just before the present one.
Yunus Karim.
No, not the commissioner, the chairperson, Yunus Karim. When I appeared before the committee, Judge Webb, what do you think we should do to make sure that these public offices work well and so forth? I said, Mr. Karim, appoint the correct people. Don't appoint people on the basis of political connectivity. Appoint people on the basis of merit. Now, I would never worry about having a shark's teeth if the commissioner, as I believe is the case, is a responsible person, is a reasonable person. Why do I need shark's teeth to bite his head off? I don't need that. There are things which you must get right in this country, which you are not getting right. It seems to many people, to some people, as if when you talk about the independence office of the tax ombudsman, you are talking about something that is not important and the like. They only listen when you talk about SARS and the commissioner. And I was saying to somebody, I'm sure if I've been writing to the minister many times. Well, one day, luckily, I found him on his cell phone, but that was a long time ago. Each time I don't. But I'm sure if the commissioner can pick up the cell phone and want to speak to the he'll be able to do that before sunset. Why? Because SARS. That is the picture people have. That's how people operate. But, the tax ombudsman, he's going to talk about protecting a taxpayer. He's going to talk about the rights of taxpayer. He wants an office to protect the rights of taxpayer. The bad culture in this country is that we try to create institutions in terms of the constitution and legislation, but we are very, very poor in implementing the protection of those rights. And that's the problem. That's why some people, maybe this conference is not even important because we talk about protecting taxpayers. I think I've deviated from my apology. I'm not answering your question. I'm being irrelevant.
Yeah, I think if we can get back maybe to the report that the GTAC did for you guys, just to see, because it might have some relevance on the discussions. I don't know if you are privy to let us know the two different options that they proposed for structural independence.
Well, broadly speaking, the one, let me just put it in broad terms. The one envisages, shall I say, total independence from SARS, not even depending on anything in relation to SARS. Of course, somewhere, in the statement, we all depend on one another. Good morning, good afternoon, and so forth and so on. Yeah, we will meet somewhere and so on. But yes, totally independent of SARS. But the other one would be, well, goodbye, we are divorced, but we will consult. Let's work out how our visitation rights in respect of the children, that kind of thing. Okay, now let's go into some arrangement. When would you like to see the children? On Saturday or Sunday? No, we can always arrange. That kind of understanding, working with each other on certain important things. In particular, which I'm not adverse to, sharing some certain services, provided, and this is a very huge proviso, provided that if we share certain services, SARS would not be able to peep unduly into activities and restrain us in carrying out our activities. But there wouldn't be a serious problem if shared services are arranged in order to reduce finances. I think it's a reasonable thing to do.
Thank you.
And there was something about the money. I didn't quite follow, Prof. You said something about?
My question actually is that we have this report that has cost us millions of rand. Are any of the questions that we are asking today, have they not been answered in that report? And if did we pay the money for the report in the first place? And the second question is, if that report, that cost you millions of rand, is not finding fertile soil, why would something like this find fertile soil?
You mean the report of GTEC?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Well, isn't that the point? Should we? I told some people a few minutes ago that I could be on a cruise, sipping coffee, and enjoying the good life that comes. Worse still, I could be sitting in my office, and I could be saying, "Well, I've asked the minister for this office to be structured properly. I've written 3 letters, no response. That's fine. Let's go ahead. Let's go on with life." I don't think that is what I would want to happen. I think it behoves me, and my staff as well, and everybody else who cares, to make sure that the taxpayers are treated properly and in a fair manner. And I said, when I was interviewed by some media, and I said that I am going to say it very slowly. I'm going to say it slowly now. I am not going to give up the fight to make sure that the rights of taxpayer are properly protected in this country by ensuring that this office is on a proper footing. I would never give up and say because the report is not being implemented, I should leave the matter there. To me, all the more why I should fight on and on and on. And I have said that I do not have monopoly of wisdom. And I believe that we need to speak to the stakeholders, the people who are conversant with the field, and get a collection of their wisdom as to whether it is a sound call in the first place to have this office independent. And I'm beginning to think that there are some views that it is a sound call. That if everything can stop now, if you can stop now and say, let us go home now, I'll be disappointed, but I would not go back home empty-handed. Already I've gathered some views which are of great help to me, which is why I'm here. Whether that document, somebody's causing it to gather dust on the shelves or not, I still believe that I'm here, I should be here. And I think this will go a long way towards addressing the issue. I don't know if I answered your question.
So Judge, are you basically saying then that the report is there? So Amanda's question was, are we addressing some of the things in the report? And I think to a certain degree we are. Look, I haven't seen the report, but especially on the structural options for the tax ombud, that has been discussed. And maybe I can move on to the next slide, and I do realize there is another question there, but I just want to, and lots more, just to give you a quick, and I'm not sure if it's in the report. Judge, is that report public knowledge? Is it available, or is that just for the tax ombud, or are you trying to get us to provide independent views that might or might not agree with what GTAC said, which is the Government Advisory Council, and this will just support that you've now harnessed all the different viewpoints, and this everybody seems to agree?
I don't think that, from the background where I come from, that report would not be confidential because public funds were used to get that information.
The mic.
Sharon, just before we proceed, just to get back to the question, I think it's a very important question. And it's something, I mean, in the first week in March, probably myself and Ota probably as well, will go to Parliament again to say why the budget for the multitude year is probably not in the public interest. And probably we will be disregarded by Parliament. And I think we should be careful that we don't let political deafness decide the future. We should continue. Like Matthew Lester once said, that those who have the ability and the platform have an obligation to keep on with this advocacy role for those who cannot. Yeah. And I think there's something, a similar comment was made by Judge actually in the briefing room before we came here. And I think that fact that we are going there, knowing that there is political deafness on certain issues, should not detract from the fact that we continue to try until we actually succeed in making the lives of everybody better.
Thank you, Peter. Valuable statement. Okay, just to give you before I take the other thing, this will also be for the discussions when we break away, is the difference between the SARS and thing, and technically is it correct, wrong, whatever, that's where we need the input. I had another question over there first, and I do note the other questions here too, right at the back there, yes?
Chair Lady, thank you. I'm Rudy van Zyl. I've got a comment that the independence of this Ombudsman is absolutely essential. At the moment, we don't have it. The problem I've got is that tax compliance is supposed to come from two sides. One, taxpayers, and I think the machinery to comply that is from SARS absolutely unbelievable. They've got powers that you can't believe, but they are auditing us as practitioners almost 90% recently. So everything has been audited. On the other side, SARS is not tax compliant. They implement or they apply the tax law just as they like. And we need a total independent ombud who can see that SARS apply the law as it stands and not as they like. Take, for instance, IDR, I'm Afrikaans speaking.
Yeah.
Time span is supposed to be 50 days on their side.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for almost 6 months now.
Yeah.
After IDR hearing, where we've escalated the Ombud, they've replied back to us that they're attending it, but SARS just ignore it. And that problem can only be addressed with a total independent Ombud with teeth. So I would prefer that they must get teeth to tell SARS, listen, this time span is past your limit, so you are losing the case in that case. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rudy. Any other questions? Yeah? And one there. And then I think, and Faith, and then we're done. And then the rest of this can be discussed in the different forums. We can air those opinions. Yes, please name and institution.
I'm Nelly Samali, a judge of the High Court. I sit a lot in tax with my tax background. My question is, do we have all the role players or almost all the relevant people in the room? In particular, those who are charged with drafting of the legislation, so that they are here and see that there's a lacuna. As we might all know, that when there's a lacuna in law, it has to go back to the same hands or that body. And it also appears as if what is needed is a lot of activism around this issue. It is warranted. So in a way, I also see that we also need students, law students, because it might also help that some of the students may write their dissertations or their theses, masters or PhDs, or even at LLP level about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question over here. Anybody want to answer that before we carry on? I think we've got from various, yes, Peter.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, and I think that's right. One thing I think we should not, with this process or any other, lose sight of the goal, which is enhancing the efficiency of the whole system, which is a multidimensional problem. It's not something that, and I'm listening to some of the complaints, a lot of that won't be fixed. And I think Judge made the point whether he has teeth or not. And I think as Psych has submitted to the Nugent Commission, sometimes we need less whips and probably more support and input into the revenue services, and we've made some proposals on that. But I think that is the goal, is the efficiency of the whole system, and we must keep sight on what things the Ombuds office will contribute towards that. And when we have this discussion, is focus on those things and make sure that we don't contaminate them with things that can actually be improved in different ways, that we have a whole system and holistically look at this. And that means that those other role players, whether it's the public protector, whether it's Parliament that has an oversight function, that they are not only aware of their obligations, but start actually doing their obligations in terms of the system. And once again, in making the system more efficient. It's not about just having whips and ganging up against SARS.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm sorry, but I'd like to support that and just add that we mustn't lose sight of the fact that SARS need teeth. I mean, there are people out there who are not paying their due amount. So SARS need to have the power to actually pursue that. And the TAA gave them that power, and unfortunately that power is so much that there are a number of people who are compliant or wanting to be compliant, who want to be treated as the law requires, that perhaps feel that they are being treated unfairly. And I think that's where the tax ombud comes in to even that balance of power. So it's not a case of taking power away from SARS. SARS need their power because, quite frankly, we'll all have to pay more tax if the guys who aren't paying don't pay. But it's a case of protect the guys who are paying and make sure that they are looked after properly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Program Director. I'm Vusumuzi Mosondo, the Military Ombud. I would like to ask the tax ombud the following question. I've listened to the issues that are highlighted as obstacles to the independence of the office. But what I would like to know is impact on the core business of the office in terms of investigating complaints of members of the public. Because, Judge, I think in your keynote address, you've said the number of complaints are actually increasing over time. So, which means somehow, in terms of your core business, you are able to function. And I'm asking this question because as the military ombud, we're on the same path of independence. And we appeared before the Portfolio Committee on Defense. After our initial appearance, the committee sought legal advice, and that advice was centered on the issue of our core business. Whether these other issues we're listing have an impact in terms of our ability to actually discharge our core business. And I must also perhaps comment on the issue that has been raised by Professor Tickle of the cost benefit. Whilst I understand that it will be beneficial, to enhance our democracy if you were to have that independence. But the reality is that, government is trying to rationalize, cut the salary bill and all that. And obviously, independence of necessity means increasing your structure, increasing the salary bill. That's why the ministers of finance, I think, they were not responding to your letters, because that was actually their worry, And finally, perhaps another issue that has been raised by Advocate Hlongwane, the issue of perception of independence, especially from the view of your clients. I think that is crucial. And we've been trying to advance that. But they said they need a scientific study, that can confirm that. So that's why we're commissioning a research on the perceptions of our clients, so that it does not remain just anecdotal evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge, would you like to respond, or?
Yeah, I think. But is this thing on?
It should be.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, General. We know each other. We we come a long way. And thank you for your contributions, General. But you want to know how or whether this impacts the lack of independence as we see it, whether it impacts negatively on the office. I'll have to take you back to what I said initially, that on the face of it, you may well think this office is working well, and that is true. But that is dependent on the goodwill of the commissioner. Now, that is not what good governance is. That the functionality of an office to depend on whether or not the other person over whom you're supposed to exercise some oversight is in good terms with you. That is poor governance, I think. But there is also a perception. And the perception on the part of the public is that the office is not that independent of SARS. And once they entertain that kind of perception, it affects the confidence that the people will have in the institution. And they may not avail themselves for the services that you are offering. It deprives us as the Office of the Tax Ombud to play the role that we should play properly in terms of, in the process of helping them, creating a culture of compliance, tax compliance. I would have a big problem if we were to say that because there's a problem, because people have got to tighten their belt in this country, ministers and people in senior positions should ignore correspondence. I would have a great difficulty with that kind of reasoning. I think before we say anything, as a matter of pure courtesy, as demonstration of faith in institutions that we have established a government, you can't practice political deafness.
Thank you.
It is not for the benefit of individual, or for me as an individual. I told somebody that I don't have tax problems, and I will never have tax problems because I don't have money. I'm not doing this office for myself, but I'm doing this office for the benefit of many people whose rights deserve to be protected. I don't know if you want to put a price on people's rights. If you want to put a price on that, good luck. I have seen people coming to my office crying, literally, a business person saying, I woke up this morning to find that my 20 million business account was frozen in an irregular fashion. I'm not going to pay my salary. I'm not going to pay my creditors because I woke up to find that my account is frozen. Only to find that SARS did that without following the correct procedure. We released a report on SARS failure to pay refunds in time. One firm, for example, the amount that they failed to pay, which they should have, went into 45 million rands. In any case, to me, does it matter whether you withhold 40 million rand from Anglo-American or 2,000 rand from Gert, which is his last 2,000 rands? It doesn't matter to me. I place no price on that. I don't understand why. Well, let me say this. In so withholding refunds which should have been paid, a practice that went over a long period of time, Does any one of you have an idea how many companies folded as a result? Does any one of you has any idea how many people lost their jobs because companies folded, because SARS failed to pay them, to refund them their monies, and they had liquidity problems? Can we calculate the financial costs of those implications and then measure up with the government's political deafness and say, well, it is justified because... Do we know how much money we have lost within the economic system of the country as a result of mal-collection of tax, abuse of tax, and so forth and so on? But those are not the questions that we must debate. A simple question. Do people have got the rights? Yes. Should we protect those rights? We must protect those rights.
Thank you. Last two questions.
I want to say something
Sure.
before we go away, which I want to put in. By the way, SARS is not against us getting independence from them. They are actually supportive of that. I think it's important to know, for people to understand that the lack of cooperation that I'm talking about is not because SARS is against us being independent of them. They are not.
Thank you. Good point. Okay, last question was here, and then Faith. Okay. Or can I go Faith first? And then last question, then we break up. We're running out of time. Yes, Faith.
Thanks, Sharon. Mine is more a comment because my first question the General has already asked. Actually, from what the judge was saying, that he does not need the shark's teeth. I think as the stakeholders, we do see the importance, and really it is necessary that the Office of the Tax Ombud is independent. But secondly, it does need teeth, because what's happening right now is the reports that are being written, it's more acknowledged and nothing else happens either than the acknowledgement. And that is where having teeth will actually make a difference. So right now we are not seeing really any great strides being taken out of the recommendations that have been made. I'm not here referring to individual taxpayer cases, but more the systemic issues that have been raised, and we just get an acknowledgement and maybe a few, well, we need clarity on this, or we do not agree. But there is nothing really that happens after that report. And that is where, if you are independent and you also have the teeth, it will actually hold more water.
Thank you, Faith. Yes, last question over here. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. My name is Rula Haji Pascalis. I'm a tax partner at KPMG, and a lot has been said this morning, and I completely agree with everyone. I also want to say that in spite of the perceived lack of independence of the Ombuds office, they actually have done amazing work with all the constraints. So we're here because we kind of, think it can actually be better. So as the judge said, the Ombud is there to protect the taxpayers' rights. Now, I've gone through the Tax Administration Act in great detail because I present a lecture on this topic, and in fact, the taxpayer does not have any rights in the Tax Administration Act. They have one right, and that is the right to a response. The right to a response. That's what they have, and that's the one that SARS often does not comply with. So if, for example, you don't put in your objection within 30 days or with exceptional circumstances over a longer period, you are precluded from objecting. But once you object and SARS has 60 days to respond to you, that just doesn't happen, and nothing happens to SARS. So your right to certainty and to progress your matter goes away. Now, we could take all of this away by changing the Act and saying that if SARS doesn't respond in 60 days, then the objection is allowed. Just like we cannot object, then the objection is allowed. That would, of course, solve all of our problems, and the taxpayer would have certainty. But I think hell would freeze over before that happens. So let's go back to the Ombud and how that could help us. And I do think the Ombud, certainly, I don't think it's a debate that they should be independent. I think there's a second step that's needed, and that is that their recommendations should be binding. Because, quite frankly, they're not asking for much. if we go to the Ombud after 6 months and we say we haven't got a response to our objection, why should it be a recommendation to SARS that they should perhaps respond to a taxpayer? That's outrageous. Something worse should happen to SARS, not just a recommendation that perhaps they should respond. So for me, it's just, it's almost like a debate we really shouldn't be having. On the third point of lack of political will, I honestly don't understand that one either, and perhaps I'm naive because, quite frankly, as was pointed out, we have a very small tax base in this country, and as international research has shown, the one thing that people that invest in this country or would want to invest in this country they want tax certainty. So we have tax uncertainty when we cannot get a response. We don't want, remember the Ombud is not there to tell us whether we are legally correct or not. They're only there to look at procedural issues. So we're not asking for much. The Ombud could help, and I'm not sure why we're even having these debates. To me, it's just, or change the act.
Yeah.
That's all I want to say.
Okay, so that leads us, thank you very much, into our panel. So the way it's going to work, and I just want to first thank my panels, thank you very much. So 2 of our panel members will be staying in this room, and the other 2 will be going to the other room. So as you go out the door here, where you had your little breakfast area, carry on straight till you can't anymore. On the left-hand side, there is room number 38 and 39. That's where half of you will be going, and the other 2 panelists will be joining you. Joining them, and if I'd like you to please stand, we have June Chong, and we have Navasha Singh from Webb Wenzel. They will be leading the discussions. Both of these ladies are very well versed in tax matters. They're both lawyers, advocates, etc., and done lots of matters. They're going to be taking the responses from each of these different groups, getting your ideas. So there's 2 issues we're going to be talking about. Should it be independent? Number 1, should be a quick one. Number 2 is, if so, how are we going to go about doing it? We've had a few proposals. We know a few things need to change, but if we can maybe just delve into those specifics, and then just with backup, why should we be doing this? And I think we've kind of discussed that too. Once that has happened, we will come back to this room. Those that are in the other rooms will come back here, and we will discuss the findings of the groups. They will give us feedback, and then we're going to take any further questions and take it from them. So now how are we going to split it? What we'd like, ideally, and I don't know where you are all from, we'd like people from different constituencies. If it's media, if it's academic, if it's private sector, whatever it may be. If you are here with a colleague, please try and split up so that we have one of your colleagues here and one in the other room. So the easiest for me is for this half to stay here, that half to move to the other room. So from there to the other room, and this side stays in this room. And then we'll reconvene, and I'm going to give you, we're running out of time, so I'm going to give you 20 minutes. I think we should be able to deliberate. A lot has been said already, and we'll be back here at 12:05. Thank you.
There are times when one's mind just how are you?
Good morning, everyone. Hi, everybody. If you can just take a seat so we can actually commence our discussion session. Thank you, everybody. So I think we all understand why we're here, what we're discussing, but there's important issues that we need feedback from all of you. And I think it's important that everybody is given an opportunity to be heard in order for us to compile the report to go to the Minister of Finance. So this is how I propose we do it. There's certain issues that have been highlighted, and I'd like to open it up to the floor in order to get some feedback on those issues. Now, 2 predominant issues have been highlighted, but I think it's actually more than that. So if we can run through the specific issues, I think we'll be able to get through it quite quickly. So our first issue, let's go to that. Just give me 1 second so I can find my documents. I think it's about the independence. So what we know at this point in time is that SARS controls the Office of the Tax Ombudsman's finance, pays the salaries of the staff of the OTO. If they're derelict in their duties, they are disciplined by SARS members. And also the fact that the property that the OTO is even based on, the lease is in SARS's name. What does that say to you? Is there any independence? There is the perceived independence, but in actuality, is there independence? And I'm going to open it up because I need to find out from you. How do you feel about that? What is your perception of whether or not the tax ombudsman is actually independent or not independent? Anybody? Yes, sir.
When the judge was talking about the fact that what they're looking for is not intellectual independence, instead they have that. Anyone who works for a tax ombudsman, they are intellectually honest in their job. They can go and investigate anything against SARS. So what they're looking for now is structural independence. My question, or what I would want us to unpack, is to what effect, like, what will that do to the bottom line? We understand things of perceptions and all of that, but you look at a person in the street who doesn't know much, they know the SARS, and then if you have more queries, you can go to the tax ombudsman if you don't find evidence with SARS. They don't understand all of these finances that come from SARS, or disciplinary hearing, or the building is leased in the name of SARS. All of those things is not of concern for them, because the crux of the matter is the ombudsman will investigate my issue, or will hear my complaint as it is, honestly, without any bias, without anything, despite whether they're renting an office at SARS or at Webb.
Understood. But in terms of that, and sorry if I'm overstepping and anybody wants to jump in at any point in time, please feel free to do so. The structural independence is also very important. Although they have the intellectual independence that Judge Nkwepe has mentioned, the fact that SARS controls everything, at this point in time, the commissioner shares a good relationship with the tax ombudsman. If that changes, if there's a different commissioner, if there's a different tax ombudsman, how is that going to impact the whole structure of the OTO? And I think that's the crux of it, because from what we've heard from Judge Nkwepe, everything is based on the sort of relations that they have. And if that goes sour, what is there to protect the OTO from the wrath, if I can put it that way, of the new commissioner or the present commissioner who doesn't agree with the new tax ombudsman? And that is the real issue. And that is why the independence is so important. Would anybody like to add on that? Yes.
Whether it is a fact that the commissioner does not agree with the tax ombudsman can shut the office, and where does it derive those powers? I don't know whether they are kept in the act of not
Okay, I'm going to hand over to Peter because this falls squarely with you.
So I was responding to something. Can you just repeat the
Yes, so what we've heard is that does the commissioner actually have the powers to shut down the tax ombudsman's office if he disagrees with anything? And if he does, where would we find that in the legislature?
Well, it's an interesting question from referring to two separate things. Can he fire the tax ombud, the whether he can shut down the office seems to be a bit more of a tricky question because the anomaly is that there doesn't seem to be an actual office. There's staff. Can he fire the staff? The answer, well, seems to be yes. So you can't have an office if you don't have staff. There will then just be the Ombud himself as a person. So it's a bit of a tricky question in that one, the head of the office, he has no control over in that respect. The actual underlying people he does seem to have, given that that right to hire and fire is vested in the SARS Act in terms of which the staff are appointed.
Okay, all right. Yes, sorry, Lucia.
I'm just thinking that will be far-fetched. I mean, for all practical purposes, I cannot see a situation where the commissioner fires ombudsman because it's the same as closing the whole office, and I really don't think they have those powers. Even though legally we're not standing on strong grounds, but I still cannot see that practically happening at all.
Okay.
You don't have to fire all of them. I think like we've seen in a lot of the other institutions, whether it's the sector, etc., we have seen where, for example, key people have been dismissed for whatever reason. I think that's why the judge's point is exactly that. At the moment, we have commissioners who are not badly inclined towards the office. We should actually be saying, well, if you had a commissioner who was on a mission to do X, Y, and Z, what could he or could he not do? And the law should be clear as to what those boundaries are.
Thank you very much, Lucia and Peter. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to ask, out of curiosity, you listed a whole bunch of things that SARS has control over the tax ombudsman.
Yes.
I'm just curious, who then oversees the tax ombudsman performance management? Is it the commissioner? Who is it exactly?
Peter? Lucia? I would assume so.
You have to ask
because
commissioner, if you think about
it can't. Yeah, it wouldn't make sense if it's the commissioner.
Telling me I'm not doing my job. I don't think that's practical again.
And then obviously, if they disagree with anything that the tax ombudsman is doing, then it's going to be a case of, well, you haven't done your job properly. So.
No, but I'm asking because I'm from the Office of the Ombudsman in the city of Joburg.
Yes.
And we actually in the same boat as the tax ombudsman, but ours, I think it's even worse because we have the ombudsman. The performance management is overseen by the city manager, the very person
that you're reporting.
Which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Agreed. But I tend to agree with Lucia in this instance. I don't think it's going to be the commissioner. Yeah. All right. So, yes.
In fact, then, I think if the commissioner actually can dismiss members of staff of the tax ombudsman, their intellectual independence also is affected because out of fear that if they go, for instance, they pursue a matter that will not be agreeable to the tax ombudsman, they'll shy away to pursue this logical.
Yes, and I agree with you. It's a very real fear, especially in this economy where all of us are dependent on our jobs and a monthly salary. If you against SARS, and SARS has and I'm saying SARS loosely, please understand that, and they have the ability to actually discipline you for basically doing your job. Yeah, it's a very real possibility. So we need to close off topics as soon as we can. So, largely speaking, do you believe that the Tax Ombudsman's office should be independent?
Yes.
So the general consensus is a resounding yes, if I may put it that way. All right, so we can close off that issue. In terms of the legalities of it, well, Peter's gone into great depth to explain this to us. It was a lot to take in, like most people have said already. We did not even consider these aspects until Peter actually brought it up, quite frankly. So if we can move on to our next aspect, which is the other jurisdictions. Now, we've heard from Professor Tickle that there are other jurisdictions that are not independent of the revenue services of the respective countries that they serve. And yet they seem to be doing their jobs very well, so-called independently, but not independently. So how do you think the independence of the Tax Ombudsman's office is going to actually impact them or impact what they do at this point in time? If you do a comparative study, if you just have a look at it holistically. Anybody? Do you think a formal independence will actually impact the office? Think so?
For the same reasons that we've said, like what we have said, that if you're a OTO staff, you're investigating SARS, and you always have fear that they might discipline you. So now if SARS is no more in control of the staff and disciplines them and they can dismiss them, then the better for them to do their job with much more independence. And also the finances, which are being controlled by SARS also, the commissioner. Now they have control over their budget, they can do what they want. There was one person from the SABC who talked about the fact that they need to be out there and be known and do some campaigns. So they'll be able to do that because now they have their own budget, which is not given to them from the commissioner, and they can distribute it according to what they think is important at that time. Because, like I said, a few people know about the Tax Ombudsman, so it's not visible. It doesn't have visibility. So all of that, I think it would impact on their independence. It would help, the taxpayers to a certain degree.
Okay. Anybody else? Peter, Lucia, so we've heard Deborah mention that jurisdictions, lots of them are not independent from their respective revenue services, yet it hasn't hindered their progress in the matters. So what we're hearing from everybody else is that although other jurisdictions, other countries have this dependence upon their respective revenue authorities, it's vital in an economy and in a situation that South Africa is in for there to be complete independence from the respective revenue authorities, in this case SARS. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I completely agree. We do need the independence, like complete independence. But then I think we have to also give it to the Office of the Tax Ombudsman, because they've done a stellar job under the circumstances.
100%.
They have really done what they're required to do.
Yes.
I don't think we need this, because remember, the way that the judge is positioning this as well, he's saying, what is going to happen when I'm not there tomorrow?
Correct.
We need this to be able to stand on its own and not depend on me or on the commissioner who's existing.
Which goes back to the relations that you have between the Commissioner's office and the Ombudsman's office.
Exactly,
Again.
but it doesn't take away from the fact that the guys have done what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, without fear and favor comes to mind.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes. Because like you read the independent and impartial, you can say, no, you're actually not, but the things that they have done are actually demonstrating that they have the courage.
Yes, they have the courage.
Yes.
They just need
Exactly.
that courage to continue irrespective of who heads the respective departments.
And whether we like like it or not, it is at the risk of maybe 1 or 2 people being deployed somewhere else because they're making, enough noise for the public to say, "Sans, what are you doing?"
Right.
So the commissioner or whoever, Franz Thomas sitting there, has to actually redeploy somebody sitting in the tax ombudsman to another office.
Yeah. Peter, do you agree with this?
Yeah, Deborah did note the various models, and I think what's important is that, as you said, different ones seem to be working for reasons because they are different.
Yeah.
And maybe we should investigate what are the aspects of independence, probably more in detail, that will lead to that effectiveness. Secondly, I also think it's important that we don't confuse issues. And we had an example here of somebody going to revenue officers. The person on the other side of the SARS counter doesn't know the law and doesn't understand what. Now, no amount of power or independence at the Ombuds office is going to solve that problem.
Yes.
That's an education problem.
That's
and you
correct.
have to solve that. And the same with you can have an independent office, it reports to Parliament. If Parliament doesn't do anything, you actually change nothing. And I think it's important that we make sure we look at this holistically, that when we look at the various models, what is once again, the goal being most effective and efficient, that it might be a scheduled entity, and as Judge said, whether it's shared services or not shared services, or whether housed in SARS but directly reporting to Parliament, etc. There might be other models than just the two at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think the underlying principle is there are concerns on the various, call it, aspects of independence, both from a trust/perceived perspective and structural. And we need to understand what of those, especially on the structural ones, do we solve, and how do we solve them? Is it just as easy as saying, well, just turn it into a scheduled entity and Bob's your uncle, or not?
And I think the how is actually going to be the most difficult part of everything, because it's well and good that we all are sitting around tables the independence, but the crux of it is how do we go about getting that independence? And that is the major issue. But let's get one hurdle done before we get to the other, right? The other thing that impacts us all is how will the independent tax ombudsman's office impact on us as taxpayers in terms of actually allocating a budget? Will it even impact them? And I say the will it because an allocation has already been given to SARS to be utilized by the tax ombudsman's office, be it for salaries or marketing or whatever the case may be. Could it? And I say this because I don't know, and if anybody does know, I'd be very interested to hear. Would it just be a matter of transferring that budget to the tax ombudsman's office, which won't really impact us? Or will that budget remain with the commissioner and a separate budget need to be given to the OTO? And how would you feel if a separate budget needed to be given, which means more money from the taxpayers' coffers? How do you feel about that? Yes.
Dumb question.
I'm sure it's not dumb. Go right ahead.
If the tax ombud is not successful in the independent on their side, what did that value if SARS thrown their way, saying, but listen here, it's for us, we also see that we think the tax ombud should get independent. For us, we're rebuilding. We all know what happened to LBC. To get back in the tax base, we need their customers. Would that not add value if it comes from their side as opposed to just from the ombuds side?
I agree with you. I really do. And from our understanding of the meetings that we've had with Judge Nkwepe, that's it. The commissioner is actually standing behind the tax ombudsman in this instance and is actually saying, yes, the tax ombudsman's office needs to be independent of SARS. So that we already have that scenario. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
If they're already paying those expenses, why couldn't we increase the amount of tax from the people that already pay taxes? Why can't that budget be split out?
But that's my point. Do we actually need a new budget? Because that was also a major issue, that there's going to be further constraints on the tax base to come up with more money in order to cover the expenses of the tax ombudsman's office. And my point is that so? Can that budget not be transferred? And if they say it can't be transferred, why not? Why not? What is that money going to be utilized for by SARS? Do you know what I mean? I mean, this is the budget allocated to the tax ombudsman's office. So transfer it. Yeah.
I think that's how it should work. It's just control. Now it's only for the
Yes.
ombudsman instead of
Yes, that's the way I'm inclined to go. Yes, sir.
So, since I've had a name check already this week, I'm trying to keep very neutral in this discussion because I am from SARS.
Yes,
so
France.
Just on a technical point here, in one of the reasons why international have tax ombud equivalent being located in the revenue service is precisely for cost reduction. Because you can share services, and hence why I have cited the GTAC report. I presume the GTAC report had that as an option. So to the extent that you make it completely independent, you will have to create a bunch of services that are currently not in the Ombuds office because they're simply using SARS capacity for all those functions. Which call center do you call for an IT problem? Who comes to fix the desktop on your desk? Those kinds of things. Currently, SARS is carrying that. It's not in any budget anywhere that you're going to see because it's just a shared service. And
So that could be the additional budget that could be required.
What is being talked about when we're talking about an additional allocation over that which is already being funded.
That's the 10 plus minus 10 million.
The minister's allocation out of SARS budget. Because remember, the Tax Administration Act does say the minister ring fences an amount of SARS budget with Ombudsman.
Yes. Okay, so now we've had it from a SARS perspective. Anybody else like to comment?
Sorry, Navasha,
yes.
we need some more.
Just like 2 minutes, we're almost wrapping up. Oh, I'll take the 10 minutes then. Thank you. Yes, sir.
For me, the key issue is for the tax ombuds really to control this budget without interference from the commission. So if, for instance, I'll share our experience with us, our budget comes as part of the Department of Defense budget. The line item, and that is allocated to the military ombud, and the military ombud can use that according to his discretion. So I think that's the best. But coming back to the issue of shared services, I think it can be beneficial as indicated. For instance, with us, the department is paying, for instance, for our building, out of their own budget, not out of the one that is allocated here. So it works in our favor. So there are pros and cons in terms of shared services.
I hear what you're saying. Is there anybody else that would like to contribute to that?
Just thinking, this leads us to the degree of independence. Judgment has said that you can either have total independence
or interdependence.
Some form of limited 80% or 70%. The point he has mentioned, the gentleman from SARS, is a very important one because now, if you say you're sharing IT or building or all of this and computers and laptops and all of that, that is something that I don't think would hinder on your independence or your efficiency as tax ombudsman. But there are other things which we have already mentioned, like control of the finances and the HR, like the appointing and firing of staff.
Yeah.
That one could render the tax ombudsman not efficient or not effective. But things like renting the same building together, using the same coffee machine and
coffee machines.
Those ones could be negotiated. For efficiency and cutting costs.
Yes, sir.
But I think the independence, they must be independent in performing their duties. I think that's the most important thing. Where you stay, it's because even SARS, they're not the building they're renting. So if they're renting a building from me, it means I will never get audited. So it's not independent. So, the property that they're using, it's really irrelevant, you know, because independence it's from
In terms of their powers.
The staff should be independent, and maybe the good relationship that Mr. Webb has with the commissioner maybe should stop, because they might compromise each other. Because that good relationship, it might be, you know, it might be like I go and lodge something, and you find that the commissioner does not want that to come, and they'll go and meet someone. And if I see the judge and the commissioner drinking coffee, and I lodge something,
You lose the confidence.
And I'm telling you, I'm not prophesying that it's going to come. South Africa politics of our politics, you know, everyone is following another one. 10 years later, that thing is going to come. You will even hear it with Judge Zone. Something is going to come on it.
Okay. Lucia, Peter, I'd like to bring you into this discussion, because from what I'm actually hearing is that generally the consensus is, sorry sir, I will get back to you right now, is that everybody wants independence as far as the powers of the tax ombudsman's concerned. But in terms of the budgetary constraints, whether or not they would actually be able to be a continued shared service with a complete independence in terms of the powers, is that something that could be motivated to be written into legislation? Peter, Lucia? Hey, that is definitely an option.
The model is something throughout the industry. Obviously, as I said, the components of independence, talking to, call it trust, being independent facilitator or independent in mind. The other is obviously structural from a so we talked about hire and fire rights, shared services, to what extent. As long it's all unfortunately in the detail, but there are models like that in any way over and above those two models. There are actually other models as well.
Yes.
But it talks to what are the key elements of independence we are seeking.
And that should be laid out.
So if we are saying structural independence, is it from finance? Is it that we need to create a heuristic person? So should be able to engage in, for example, the question we've asked was, well, they signed a MOU with the public protector and with SARS. Well, if there's no legal office, how do you sign a MOU?
Who signs it?
Who's actually signing? And it seems that it's the judge in his personal capacity as a tax Ombud. Well, surely then there should be some juridical presence or legal personality, if that is required, so that you effect this, whether you got shared services or not.
Yes.
So that is an aspect of independence, for example, that may contribute, irrespective of whether your IT and your finance is being done
shared,
through
basically.
a shared service.
Yeah.
But I think that's the more detail we'd have to understand from the judge's office.
Yes.
What are the components that will make his office a lot more effective and efficient, or that he feels will enhance?
Yes. Thanks, Peter. Lucia?
I think I agree with Peter. For me, it's not like the interest. As long as I know that SARS is not going to find some clever IT to check what I'm doing.
And I think that's what Judge Nkwepe even said as well.
So if we get that right, I think that will be fine.
Yeah.
The most important part is that as an employee of I should not feel that I owe SARS any explanation for what I'm doing. I should not feel that I can lose my job tomorrow for doing my job.
Yeah. Agreed. Yes, sir, you had something to contribute.
Yes, thanks, ma'am.
Yes.
I think cognizant of the fact that there's a parallel similarity of all Ombuds. And just in short, the three pillars that which the Ombudsman is based on, one would be accountability, impartiality, and fairness. But looking at this document and coming the step about the independence of staff, this 2.3 whereby SARS will staff. So ultimately, on this level, independence is compromised.
Yeah.
However, we should not also lose sight that the Ombudsman
ombudsman and the mother body that is disabled, they are friends. There cannot be any animosity between the two. So there should be an objective complementarity. Hence, there should be an understanding between the mother body and the ombudsman. But it must not be subjective.
Correct, correct.
Coming to the OTO, I'm a bit skeptical because as I'm listening to the discussions here, my question is, what is the legal basis? You have the Public Protector over the Public Protectors Act, the Military Ombuds, the Military Ombuds Act.
Yes.
In terms of the OTO, Tax Administration Act and the SARS Act, to me those are national legislations. So what is the empowering?
But I think that was actually the question as well that Peter was trying to actually answer initially. I see the other group is beginning to come back, so we're going to wrap up. Can I take one more comment?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay? Yes, yes, General.
One critical issue that I feel also needs to be deliberated is whether the recommendations of the Ombudsman, because we can do all this.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and that goes back to whether or not the Office of the Tax Ombudsman actually has teeth. And I think the public at large wants to see that if SARS, if you fail to do X, Y, and Z, there's going to be a repercussion. So is the general consensus that when it is made, there should be some sort of a repercussion, or the report should be binding and enforced by the Minister on SARS? Is that the general feeling? All right, thank you everybody for participating. That concludes my part of it. Yes, okay. Yes, yes.
So Navasha and I are going to do the feedback session together, and I do want to thank everyone who participated in the other stakeholder session. Everyone was participating a lot, and I really appreciate the feedback. We're not going to have time, and I'm going to say that if you do have other feedback, please email it to us. My email address is on the Webber's website, june.chong@webberwenzel.com, because in the course of next week, we are going to be drafting the report, the first draft, which will be circulated. Yeah. So we're going to first go, the first issue is public perception of independence of O2O from SARS. The general sense in the room was that OTO is not structurally independent, but there is intellectual independence. It does not hinder taxpayers from going to SARS, because at the moment it is the last resort. And there is the hope and the need for greater structural independence. That is the general sense of that room.
And that was pretty much shared with our group as well, where it was said that the intellectual intelligence, which was stressed by Judge Nkwepe, is there, but they need to be seen to be completely independent of SARS, meaning to work without any fear or favor in terms of the recommendations that they issue. They should not have the proverbial sword hanging over their head, June. So
yes. So that goes on to the second point, which is how should the independence be dealt with? We're not going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the statutes, but we want to talk about what the recommendations came about at the end of our session. The ideal coming from that room, the input from that room, is that they want the OTO to be completely independent from complete HR team, they can have the same kind of HR system, but a different HR policy and a different HR team, different legal team, different finance team, different accounting team, because it's not just a question of being legally independent. You must be perceived to be also functionally and everyday operationally independent.
Yeah. Well, from our session, it was more a factor of everybody's okay with shared services in terms of like IT, the building, etc. But in terms of, like you said, HR, in terms of the powers of the Ombudsman, what they would like to be seen to be done is it written into legislation that there would be shared services. However, the shared services only go so far as things such as IT, office space, etc. But in terms of the powers of the Ombudsman, it should be completely independent. And at that juncture, what Peter mentioned is that we should actually look at the other jurisdictions in other countries and see how they've attained the shared services with the independence of the powers as well.
So from a statute-wise, I think resoundingly in that room, everyone wanted the OTO to be a Schedule 3 entity and to work towards having an OTO Act, a separate statute. But at the moment, we're still in the TAA, so we're going to work towards having more amendments in the TAA, clarifications in the SARS Act to the extent necessary, and to work from the TAA and then going forward, working towards a separate act.
Yeah.
Who knows whether that will happen in my lifetime, because we've been wanting a new Income Tax Act, but
not happening.
that doesn't quite happen. Yes.
Yeah. Well, pretty much the same thing. We didn't go into discussion of the statutes at that point in time, but again, it goes back to structural independence and independence in terms of the powers. And then that led us on to our budgetary constraints. And what Franz actually brought up is that the budget that needs to be allocated is more in terms of the IT, etc. But that can be dealt with if we continue with the belief that we can have shared services, which then eliminates the need for additional budget for those kind of things. And then the budget currently allocated to SARS for everything else should just be transferred to the OTO's office.
I think from our discussions, I didn't actually ask if people were happy with having to allocate another 10 million rand for a Schedule 3 entity. But I think impliedly, because everybody wanted a Schedule 3 entity ultimately, I think the sense is everybody is happy with that. But in the sense of budgets and wanting to have more budgets, I think very closely related to that is there should be a lot more recommendations that should be given to the OTO on how to spend the budget and having more shared services. Quite a number of issues were raised from comments from the military ombud and another ombud's office of the practical difficulties of getting funding from Parliament, even when there is a separate legislation, even when there are measures in place which allow for those ombuds officers to get funding. I think the OTO has done a marvelous job of having practical workarounds and getting funding and working closely with SARS in making sure that capacity-wise, funding-wise, operationally, they get everything they want. So it's a case of going forward. We have that end goal in mind, and when we do reach that end goal of a Schedule 3 entity, we are able to incorporate those relationships and those practical workarounds into that end goal as well.
Yeah, and then that led us to our next point, which was whether or not taxpayers believe that the Tax Ombudsman's office need to have more teeth. And the resounding response was, yes, they do. In terms of a recommendation that's given or a report that's drafted, it should have a binding effect on SARS. Alternatively, there should be some sort of repercussion for not following the report that was actually given.
Ideally, I think we all want recommendations to be binding, but if we look at comparative jurisprudence of other ombuds offices in other countries, none of them actually have are able to have recommendations being binding. We also reflect on what the judge has discussed earlier. I don't know if this is a question of advocacy where we say, ideally, yes, we do want recommendations to be binding, but then we have to pick what do we really want to fight about. And perhaps this is one of the aspects that we're going to have to say, ideally, yes, recommendations are binding, but if not, SARS needs to give reasons and give reasons within 30 days or act within 30 days.
For not following
the recommendation.
Okay, I think that what covers it from our side. Was there anything further from you?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. That's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies. If you ever want to stop working at a law firm, I think you can definitely go work at a university. I saw you had everybody well under control. They were all writing down. So you do have alternative jobs. Thank you, ladies. I think it's listening to all the responses. I think we've got various options. that need further deliberation, please, that invitation is out there. If you have any further comments, I think a lot of this has to sink in, and you have to consider a lot of these issues that were raised today, and really good, valid points being made, a lot of good suggestions coming out of this. June and Navasha will draft the findings into a document. It will be made available to everybody that was here for their input. Timing, we're not quite sure. At the end of the week, I think we'll come to the panelists. Thereafter, I think it will be sent out to everybody else. And obviously, there's urgency to this. I think, you said it's been falling on deaf ears. The more voices, the better. It's a legislative process that might have to, the wheels need to get going. So we need to kind of get things happening. So it will be sent. Any other comments, please send it to them. As I said, their email addresses are on the website. Please pop them a mail. So that they can incorporate it into their report, and then we'll give it to the judge to take further. Right, I think that comes to the end of my thing. I'm going to hand over to Gert van Heerden, who is the acting CEO for the Office of the Tax Ombud, to give thanks to everybody. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think this is probably the least that I've ever spoken at one of these events, and I think maybe the judge is happy because I tend to go off on a tangent. So I just want to relay the thanks on behalf of the Tax Ombud for everybody who came here, from our counterparts, for the judges' counterparts, the esteemed judges, Judge Mali, Judge Komu, General, thank you for very much for attending the session. Judge Mwepe, as a taxpayer, thank you for taking a stand. We really need somebody to take care of taxpayers' rights, and regardless of what happens, whether this is successful or not, I don't think that anybody will ever be able to say you did not try your best. So thank you very much from all taxpayers, as a taxpayer myself, on behalf of the Office of the Tax Ombud and taxpayers themselves. Dr. Smulders, my apologies, she used to be Professor. Dr. Smulders, thank you for facilitating. I think you did a wonderful job. To our panel members, thank you very much. Professor Tickle, Mr. Divenage, Mr. Faber, and Advocate Hlongwane, thank you very much for assisting. I think that it really set the tone, and we got a lot of value from your inputs into what we want to accomplish here. Our hosts, Webb Wenzel, thank you very much for providing us with a venue and assisting us. Thank you to the Mail and Guardian for also helping. Navasha and June, thank you very much for facilitating these sessions. And there's still a lot of work from your side that needs to happen. Thank you very much in anticipation. Mrs. Patel as well, I think that she had already left from Mail and Guardian. Thank you very much again to the Mail and Guardian for assisting us. Members of the media, some of them have already had interviews with the judge and some of the panel members. I do believe that people will still be available, but you can just talk to Pearl or any one of our communications team. Speaking of which, our communications team and the members of the OTO who assisted with this, they worked around the clock. Thank you very much to the communications team and everybody from the OTO who assisted with us. I think that it was quite a good session, and there's a lot of value add that we will be able to assist the judge in his, I don't want to say the word warpath, but his crusade on. And then just to everybody else who took the time, there is a lot of hot topics that need to be raised, that this was not necessarily this was a lot of hot topics that needed to be raised. This was not necessarily the session wherein it needs to be raised. Binding recommendations, there are a lot of different views on it. We will get to it. We will have those discussions. Let's take one step at a time. In terms of taxpayers' frustrations, we understand that people are frustrated with a lot of the things that we do. We understand that even in terms of our procedures, there are a lot of frustrations, and people don't always understand what it is that we can do, what it is that we cannot do. But please rest assured that whatever we can do, which the law allows us to do, we will do. Whenever we make a decision to reject a complaint, whenever we make a decision that a complaint is invalid, it's because we are legally bound to do so. It's not that we simply make those decisions and we simply want to frustrate taxpayers further. There are unfortunately certain limitations that we do have, but whenever we can, we do assist, and we have assisted quite significantly in the past. And I do just want to mention in terms of the recommendations as well, sorry, I forget to mention Mr. Tomasek from SARS who also attended. Thank you very much, sir. I do need to... And I do need to give SARS credit. The judge mentioned that we do have a good relationship with SARS, and in more than 99% of the recommendations that we do make, they do implement. So it's not like we do have a lot of instances where SARS do not want to implement, and they are legally bound to give us reasons if they do not. Unfortunately, the timeframes we need to still have discussions on, but we do have a memorandum of understanding in place that we are going to review at some stage as well, and we have consistent collaborations with SARS as well. The last thing that I just want to mention, and it did come up in terms of systemic issues, we have been able to reduce systemic issues from more than 29 to very little. We've been working with SARS to get those issues resolved so that even our reports that we issue is not just chat. It's not we issue a report and we say, parasols on the back, and we say, job well done, now it's up to SARS. We're working with SARS to reduce all these issues. And once those issues are resolved, the systemic issues is really where a lot of value can be added by this office. So we've done a lot of work on that, and please, when you do get those issues, do not sit and be frustrated. Bring it to our attention so that we can investigate them, and we can assist in collaboration with SARS. We can assist in making SARS' service better for taxpayers, which is ultimately our purpose. So thank you very much. There is lunch being served. I think I went over by like 1 minute or 2 minutes. I said I do talk too much. So please join us for lunch, and then we can have further discussions. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, yes. They asked me for a group photo for the panel. Group photo. I know.